Hey, welcome to this edition of Rains on the Cardinals podcast. Rob Rains, Mike Rains, we all back together again down here at our spring training headquarters at the Homewood Suites in Palm Beach Gardens. We thank everybody for tuning in here a week or so into Cardinal spring training. We got a lot to get to as we break down kind of what's happened to this point. Obviously, not a great start to spring training. I know nobody really worries about wins and losses in the spring, but when you're off to a 1-4 start, I think things probably could be a little bit better.
I think there's two ways to look at it, right? There's the thought mindset of, hey, we're 1-4. We're not really hitting very well. We're not doing great. And then on the flip side, I really think spring training is the time that you can hone in on individual performances. And that's where you look at the highlights of success from various players.
Right. And I think you're also obviously, you talk about a small sample size, five games into spring training when a lot of guys haven't played more than two or if the most 3 games. So we are kind of over analyzing and over critiquing those early results, but you kind of do that in the regular season as well. And also, I think some of the games that the Cardinals have dropped have come as a result of some late inning hiccups in the bullpen with guys that aren't necessarily going to be guys that are talking about on the roster when the regular season begins.
Correct. But there have been some glimpses within these 5 games of guys that I think have a legitimate shot at making the bullpen. You look at a player like Tekoa Roby, and he's looked great. He's looked very good. He's looked very, efficient with his innings and the way he's pitched. And so, there are highlights like that have worked out well.
We're going to tell you, of course, that this podcast and all of our spring training coverage is sponsored by AAA Travel of Missouri, as well as our main title sponsor, the Drury Hotels, for all of our free content here on STLSportsPage.com. And then, as we mentioned, our headquarters hotel down here in Jupiter, Florida, Palm Beach Gardens. We appreciate their support. We'd like to have Mike down here as well as we talk about this. You've seen a few games now, so I guess just some of your early impressions, and I want to get into some of the individual situations that we're going to talk about.
Well, the early impression right off the bat is Victor Scott. He was a guy who we thought out of camp last year had a shot at making this club and being a big supporter and have to be excited for the way that he's played. And then you have to be excited with the way that some of these young pitchers have played so far. Quinn Matthews has looked great. Gordon Graceffo's looked really good. Michael McGreevy today looked fantastic. So I think there's some positive highlights to be happy within the first week.
I think coming into camp, we all kind of talked about perhaps the most interesting battle, the most competitive battle, if we wanted to look at that way, once Arenado was settled into to being in this lineup, was what they're going to do in center field. On Tuesday in Tampa Bay, you saw Nootbaar start in center, Scott started in left. Howie Marmol said he's going to do that from time to time this spring to get Nootbaar some reps. And we all know that Nootbaar is going to be in the lineup someplace. So if he's in the lineup someplace, it's going to affect the playing time of somebody else, which primarily might be Victor Scott II and Siani, kind of a 3-way battle there for the starting center fielder spot. And it's not like the same guys going to be playing there every day anyway once you get into the regular season. But Scott looks like he's come to camp trying to win that job.
And I'm proud of Ollie for working through different guys throughout the center field, right? Because there was a time a few years ago we looked back and, DeYoung got hurt and they were afraid to move Edman over to shortstop because he hadn't played shortstop yet. And so I think it's a good thing to see them moving them around so that guys feel comfortable everywhere they can play, right? But yes, when you look at the way that Victor Scott has played so far, and I think, as you look at these close battles, you probably would say it's safe to say 13 position players are probably the number that the Cardinals carry this year. Mm-hmm. It seems to be the way they've done it so far with the roster being 26 now, 13 position players, 13 players. Mm-hmm. Well, you're carrying both Herrera and Pages.
Correct.
You know that Donovan, Gorman, and Burleson are there. So, there's room for both Scott and Siani, but I think the problem is you don't want Victor sitting on the bench.
Correct. Yeah, he's still a young player. I think he reminds me kind of a change we saw a year ago. Mason Wynn comes up to join the ball club at the end of the 2023 season, struggled to play well. Well, Victor Scott had a very good spring training last year, but still was not going to make the ball club. They had optioned him to Memphis before Dylan Carlson gets hurt in the collision with Jordan Walker out in Arizona. So he has to be the starting center fielder. I just don't think he was ready. And I know he didn't come up at the end of the season, but just the comparison between how Wynn struggled and then had a great 2024 when his first full season made. I can see Victor Scott doing that same thing if he gets the opportunity to play. He does a lot of things, maybe not quite as good as Siani defensively, but I think he's a better hitter. And I think he obviously, based on the fact that he stole 94 bases in the minor leagues in 2023, if he gets on base, I think he's going to be able to steal bases. And that could be another element to this offense that they haven't had before.
And I think if you look at the two of them comparatively, Siani's probably the better player right now, but I think Victor Scott has the higher ceiling and potential overall. So I think you're going to get more out of Scott than you will out of Siani. Siani's probably reached the peak of his playing level that he's going to be at.
And he could be a very good fourth outfielder, come in for defense, especially, with Jordan Walker playing right field, there's still going to be a lot of games when you have that lead late in the ball game that you're going to want to sub him out for defense if it's a 1 or 2 run late. I will say this too, Ali has talked about this spring and some of the times that the media has had a chance to speak to him is one of the things that they're trying to balance this spring, and it'll be a balancing act during the regular season as well, is the short term versus long term. They know that there's some players who they could play in the lineup right now who would make them better in April of 2025. But they're trying to find out guys who are going to be here in 2026, 2027, 2028. So that's, how they balance those positions. And I think center fielder is definitely one of them is how they balance that short-term versus long-term situation.
And I think the other things that come into play is what is happening with the rest of the lineup around them, right? Last year, the rest of the lineup was really struggling, so you needed Siani's bat because he was playing well. Now, if Wilson Contreras is healthy, Arenado's playing well, and Nootbaar is doing what he's capable of doing, then you've got room for Scott and Walker to kind of grow a little bit throughout that lineup if everybody else is protecting him around it.
Two other players that I wanted to talk about specifically in the position player side, and then we're going to get into the pitching a little bit. Jordan Walker, and I know that he didn't have a good game on Wednesday in Tampa against the Yankees, but neither did virtually anybody else on that ball club. He only had 3 hits. But I think Walker has made some good strides. I think he's progressing well. I think the work he's put in with Brant Brown, the new hitting coach, is working. I think they have to be very positive about the way Jordan Walker has started this spring.
My first 2 takeaways that I've noticed when seeing Jordan Walker, he looks to me like he's filled out a little bit more of his size. His legs look a little bit bigger. He looks a little bit more I don't necessarily want to use the word thick, but it's just kind of what he looks
growing
like.
Into his body a little bit.
Body better, which I think is showing that the weight room in the offseason training is really working out. The 2 things that I want to see better for Walker, though, as he progresses, you want to see the walks come up and the strikeouts come down, which means you want to see him stop chasing those pitches that are outside, low and away, because he's got a really long swing. And so when he connects, the ball goes a long way. But when he chases that stuff and isn't drawing the walks is where he struggles. And so I think that's the number that I want to see. Strikeouts come down, walks come up.
Right. Just stop chasing those low and away sliders is the main thing to help his game. The other young position player who I think has caught everybody's attention, and I don't think it's a surprise because we knew last year how good of a prospect he was, is the first-round pick from a year ago, J.J. Weatherholt. I think everybody's just really, really happy with how he's played.
And the way he approaches the game, the way he hits, everything looks, like he's been doing this for
he looks like a ball player.
He looks like a ball player, yes. So I'll be very interested to see kind of where he starts the year as things progress, because again, he's only 21 years old, 22 maybe. So he'll be here before you know it, but he's probably a little bit away still.
One of the things we don't know, and it'll be interesting to see how this handles, not just with JJ, but with some of the other young prospects as well, is you kind of had under the old regime, when Gary LaRocque was running the farm system and some of the ways that they operated in the past, you kind of could predict where guys were going to start. They traditionally started maybe a little bit lower level than they were probably capable of playing, and then work their way up to the higher level at some point during the season. We don't know if Chaim Bloom, if Rob Cifolio, the guys in charge of the new organization going forward now in the minor leagues, how they feel about positioning players to start the year. It wouldn't shock me if J.J. Weatherholt starts at Double-A Springfield. And I think he'll be there at some point fairly early in the year. It also wouldn't surprise me if he starts at Peoria.
But at this point of the season, too, when, the whole organization is trying to rebuild and re-get back to where they were from a player development standpoint. So are you really losing anything by starting him in Springfield and seeing what he's got? And probably not. So
it all depends on where you're going to play him, what position you're going to play him at. Is he going to play shortstop there? Because he's probably not the starting shortstop in St. Louis in 2026 or 20, with Mason Wynn still here. So, and then it all comes down to a trickle down effect. If he's playing second base, okay, who's the second baseman at Memphis? Who's the second baseman at Springfield? Who's the second baseman at Peoria? Because they want him. Obviously, he's going to play, and he's going to be a priority player. But you have to still find spots for other guys too.
And I think the 2 players this season that will kind of determine where they and how they see JJ progressing are Nolan Gorman and Thomas DeJacy, because if they see both of them as big parts of this infield, one of them's playing third and one of them playing second, well, where does JJ fit into that mold as they move forward?
Visiting with Mike Raines here on the Raines on the Cardinals podcast, coming to you from Jupiter, Florida, the Cardinals spring training.
And before we get to pitchers, I have one more position player.
Go ahead, bring it up. Bring it up.
Because the other player that's really, looked great. So, and I realized it's a small sample size, but Luken Baker.
Mm-hmm.
Luken is really hitting the ball well. He's playing well. He hit a big 3-run home run. And again, he's one of those guys that, like, where does he fit in? Where is there room for him? Because you've got a log jam at first base between Contreras and Burleson.
Mm-hmm.
And Ollie has said that those guys are going to kind of split some time there. So, it's going to be, is it a similar situation to what Burleson did last year when he played so well that he forced their hand? Well, if Baker does that, then what happens?
I think he gets traded somewhere. I just don't see a fit. I mean, I like him, and I think he can play in the major leagues. And I think he has a chance to be a good hitter. I just don't see a real fit for him other than maybe as a right-handed bat off the bench. And I just don't know that they're going to have that roster spot available, because you have to have somebody to be a backup shortstop. You have to have somebody to be a backup outfielder. I don't know that there's going to be a spot for him.
And it's just an interesting case because, that he's trying to, obviously it's still very early and there's still a month to go, but I'll be curious to see if he continues to force the club's hand and try to say, like, hey, I'm playing well. You got to do something here.
And they are giving him a good look. I mean, he's got some good chances to play early on here, which might be, again, kind of showcasing him a little bit to some of the other clubs if they don't see a fit for him here. Okay, so now we're going to switch to the pitching side, and we're going to talk about JJ and some of the other young position players making a quick impression. Nobody has made a more positive impression than Quinn Matthews.
He's looked very good. 3 strikeouts on the 2 innings of work so far. His off-speed stuff has really put guys away. He looks like he's been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, I don't really see a spot where he breaks camp with this team as a member of the starting rotation. I think he's going to go to Memphis, but I think he's putting some pressure on some other guys, and I think he might be, tipping the Cardinals' hands a little bit if they do want to try to look at some trade possibilities with a couple of the older starters in the rotation that they didn't move over the winter. Maybe this is their plan. Maybe we want to come to spring training, see what Quinn Matthews could do, see what Michael McGreevy could do, see how comfortable the team would become putting them in the starting rotation, which will free up the opportunity to maybe trade Steven Matz, maybe trade Eric Fetty.
What's really interesting is Michael McGreevy has done everything that they've asked of him, and they really haven't given him a legitimate shot to be a starter. He got 2 games last year where he looked fantastic, and the 2 innings that he pitched today, looked great. So, between Quinn Matthews and Michael McGreevy, I think Gordon Graceffo and Tekoa Roby, I think those 4 guys are kind of forcing the Cardinals' hands here because they're playing very well. Now, the question they have to figure out is, do they see them starting in the bullpen to get some, just an inning or 2 here and there, or do they see them forcing the hands of Steven Matz and Miles Michaelis?
And and the thing is, that teams, and it's already happened a little bit. The Mets being one team, there are going to be pitchers that get hurt during the spring, so there are going to be teams that are looking to make a trade to fill in if they don't have a good young pitcher in their organization ready to step up and take that opening from a guy getting hurt. They're going to be looking around other clubs to make deals. So it's something to kind of keep your eye on a little bit. The other young pitcher that you mentioned, Roby, and how impressive he was in his first outing. He is coming off a couple of injury-filled years, so I think he's a little bit farther behind maybe where Quinn and McGreevy are. But he I think is, and we mentioned him on the last podcast too. He's not a guy that you should overlook, because he's going to come, if he's healthy, he has a chance to pitch and pitch well in the big leagues.
And I think he's a perfect bullpen candidate, because the way he came in the other day, hitting 96, 97 on the gun, and then all of a sudden he comes in at 82 to put you away with a strikeout. I mean, that right there is going to work in the bullpen. I mean, that's going to play well and really be a good piece. So, I think that's the challenge is, as they work through, do they see these guys as a starter? Do they see these guys as the bullpen? Someone like, Matthew Libator at some point, maybe they see him as a starter eventually, but right now he's flourished really well in the bullpen. So maybe that's the route for Tekoa Roby as we kick things off.
And we can't overlook Tink Hence either. I mean, he had a rough first inning in the game against the Yankees in Tampa, gave up, 6 hits, walked. The guy got 1 out of the 7 guys that he faced, ended up being charged with 6 runs, but then he comes back out thanks to the reentry rule and gets a 1-2-3 second inning. So, I'm maybe a little bit nervous his first spring training outing. He's still a guy that they brought along very slowly, but I think you're going to see a lot more and hear a lot more better results out of Tink Hence going forward.
And I think the other guy too, not a young pitcher, but on the flip side, I've always been a big fan of Steven Matz when he can stay healthy.
Mhm.
And I truly think that when he's at his right, he looks like a pretty good left-handed pitcher that's very helpful for this club.
Or his best value to this team might be as a trade chip too.
And
though.
it might be.
So, the other guy that I think we need to highlight before we move on to a couple other topics is Wilson Contreras. I think again, very early in the spring training, very small sample size, but
They have been. And so I think his offense is going to be a huge, huge addition to this team if he stays healthy all year. And that's the goal at first base, for him to stay healthy, right?
he had a weird slide into second base the other day, and I said, "How about the odds of him probably moving to first base and then like breaking his hand sliding or into a base or something?"
Let's hope that doesn't happen, right?
With his luck, with his injury luck,
I think the thing that's going to help, Goldie made a lot of plays last year. He's made a lot of plays throughout his life that look just incredible. The way he picks the ball, the way he stays on the bag, and things like that. But now you've got another year of Mason Wynn figuring it out, and so Mason, with as good as he is at shortstop, is going to make the job easier for Contreras. And I think Arenado is going to make the job easier for him too, because it's not like you're trying to pick up a rookie that's, maybe just rushing the throw or something is not as good. Arenado can do this blindfold probably, right? So I think that's going to play a big hand into how well Wilson plays first.
The other two areas that we're going to be watching, not only through the early returns of spring training, but actually through all of spring training, is the changes that they made to Roger Dean Chevrolet Stadium, where the new Dean, the 25-foot difference in the outfield gap in left center, 16-foot difference in the gap in right center. I've already seen some balls go out of the ballpark that wouldn't have gone out a year ago. How is that going to help the confidence of these hitters to realize they can get a home run without having to mash the ball 5 miles?
Yes, for sure. And the thing about J.J. Weatherholt's home run, it would not have been a home run in any 30 big league parks. So is that good or bad? But it helps him build the confidence. And like we've talked about before, confidence can go a long way for some of these guys.
Yeah, especially the young guys that are just trying to get their feet on the ground. The other thing that's different about spring training games this year, you'll notice if you're watching them on television or come down to Jupiter at some point during the spring, the automatic ball strike challenge system, your early returns.
I really like this system with how quick it is. And I think it's going to be a great tool. I think the question is going to be MLB has to figure out what are the rules behind it and how many challenges can you use and where and how does that work?
Yeah, you get 2 per game. As of now, the way it's set up, you get 2. And if you're right, if you challenge and the call is you're either overturned in your favor or confirm, then you keep that challenge. Kind of like the flag thing in football, where you get that extra one but if you're wrong, you lose that one. Max Scherzer, not a fan. He had 2 calls go against him in the game in Toronto.
I would be curious to see what some of the umpires said, because there was a game that I caught the other day, not a Cardinal game, but the play was challenged, and the umpire says on the microphone that, well, the call was surprisingly correct. And so, I think some of the umpires may have fun with it too. But I think with as quick as the system is, I'm a big fan of it.
If your goal, it's kind of like the instant replay system. If your goal is to get the calls right and avoid any potential, we would have won the game except for the call by the umpire, then it's a good system, because it's only going to affect, it only affects a few pitches. It only affects pitches that are close. And I think it's going to help a guy like Lars Nootbaar, who, really has a good eye, kind of like it would have really helped Matt Carpenter back in the regular season this year. But I think 2026, there's a real good chance you'll see it at the major league level.
And I would say it needs to be there, right? Because that's the whole focus. If you want to be right and have games that matter, then that's what needs to happen.
So as we wrap up this edition of the Reigns on the Cardinals podcast, our spring training edition from our headquarters hotel, the Palmwood Suites here in Palm Beach Gardens, coming up the next week or so, a lot of games against the Astros and the Marlins, the Mets, the Nationals, the 4 teams the Cardinals always play. What are you going to be looking for? What are you going to be concentrating on?
I think you just want to continue to see these young pitchers and how well they play, right? You know, we've talked about Quinn Matthews, so let's just continue to watch him and see how he develops. And, you know, the next game he comes out, he may be trying to work more off speed or however it is. So I'm just curious to see how these guys continue to progress. And I'm also, you know, curious to watch as we see Victor Scott. Is he going to continue to stay, you know, I don't want to say hot, but he's batting 600 to start spring training. So is he going to stay like that as we move forward?
And see how they handle the playing time between all those guys out in the outfield. So, well, we'll have all the action covered all spring here on STLSportsPage.com, our daily Jupiter Minute video recap of every day, plus our postcard from spring training with all the highlights as well, and some other features and columns coming up as well. And another edition of the Rains on the Cardinals podcast coming up next week here on STLSportsPage.com. For Mike Rains, this is Rob Rains. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, everybody.